Hello everyone and welcome back to Bitwig Studio and Music Production. This is lesson 4.10, and in this lesson I'm going to talk about using the macro controls. We've already looked at the macro controls a few times, but I figure now is just as good a time to bring it up to remind you exactly how they work. And again, I don't use macros that often unless it's going to be like in a live performance situation. Otherwise, I tend to like being able to actually see the controls and see what's moving because I tend to draw in a lot of automation myself. And if that's the case, you probably aren't going to find yourself using the macros. But for a lot of people, even working live, they love, or excuse me, even working on a project not live, they like to be able to turn the macros to get sounds that way. And honestly, it's also a great thing if you have saved your own preset and you're sharing it with a friend or something and you're like, look how this can really mess with your sound. If they have like 8 macros they can just turn and get instant results, it is a great tool. It's great to use. So let's talk about one way we could possibly set it up. And I'm going to set this up in like maybe more of a live performance context. So we have our loop here playing, and right now it's being affected a lot. And what I'm actually going to do here is I'm going to drag this delay in here at the end of my chain for right now, just so I can have more things I can use macros on. So this is what our effect is, and it's kind of like a flanged, reverbed delay, right? That in essence is what it is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an effect track. And I'm not sure if we're going to do another series on like advanced live performance specific to Bitwig, but if we are, this is one of the things that I would be covering. And what it is using a ton of effect tracks or send return tracks to manipulate your sounds. And the reason for doing that is because I always like to have my sound clean, at any given moment. And I don't like the potential pitfall of screwing something up in here and triggering something and still having an effect going and not recognizing it. So what we can do is I'm going to tab to the other view real quick. Let's take this guy and drop him into scene 1 so we can actually have access to it. And let me just delete this as well. And now what I'm going to do is on this effect track, I'm just going to call this my flanged verb. Awesome. So what I can do is take this FX chain. I'm just going to take it. I'm going to drop it onto the flanged verb. You can see it's moved it over there. All right. And I want this mix to be up 100%. I'm also going to go in here and I'm going to turn the amount of reverb up quite a bit. Maybe not to 100, but pretty close. And the delay as well, I'm going to turn that up quite a bit. And now let me just play back and see if I need to alter any of these settings when I'm actually sending this audio. So the sound I'm looking for here is something that's a little bit more than I'm ever going to want, because very rarely will I send something up 100%. But if I do, I also don't want it to be out of control. So for me right now, this is good enough. I'm happy with it. I'm not going to do any pre-post. We're just going to leave it as it is. So now what do I want to do? Well, if I'm playing this back in real time and I have my little sound going and I start sending it, I mean, that is all well and good, but I don't have any control over what's happening in here. So one great thing about the FX chain is that I can open this up and now I have access to a bunch of different macro knobs. And with these macro knobs, we looked at this before, you can right click and you can either set them to be in bipolar or just in normal, lowest to highest mode. And we can now go in here and start setting a few of these. So for example, maybe I want to adjust the feedback. Maybe I want to have a parameter that controls that. And let me just see how this stuff actually works. Okay, I have a MIDI controller hooked up, and so I have no idea where these things are going. I might actually change that in a minute, but here's what I'm going to do. The first one I'm going to mess with is time. So I'm going to pull time down, and I'm going to map the range that I want. So I'll say that much is good. And now you'll notice as I pull this up, that's as high as it will go if I'm going at 100%. Maybe I'll set it somewhere in the middle for right now. Okay, I can also set multiple things to the same macro, so I'll show you that real quick. Maybe we'll have, as my time goes up, my rate will also increase on this LFO. Not a crazy amount, but just a little bit of an amount. And maybe also I want the amount to just go down by a little bit. So in this case, I'm actually going to set it up a little bit differently. Okay, so you can see how we now have the amount moving in reverse of the time and the rate on the flange. Okay, so these are my flange controls. And even now when I play this back, okay, it's subtle, but there is a difference there, and that's all I'm going for in this case. So I could set this to some other things, like I could actually adjust the amount of reverb I want. Let me just go in here, close up the flanger for right now, and let's turn the reverb mix down a little bit. And so as I turn this up, this is going to just basically get me a bigger reverb. Okay, so that's good. I'm also going to make the width go up, and the reverb time go up a little bit. The build-up, the diffusion, the delay time will come down. Size, we'll increase that too. Lovely. So now watch what happens when I turn this knob. You can see all of those parameters in the reverb are moving. And maybe I'll also push it more towards late. Okay, so now we can take a listen to this as well. So that one makes a pretty big difference. And I could go in here and I could keep setting these macro controls to different things. And obviously I can come in here, I can double click and I can re-click and rename, excuse me. So if I know that that's controlling the flanger, that's controlling the reverb, etc., etc., etc. And one other thing, if you are working in like a DJ type context, it's always good to kind of just throw a filter onto the end that's normally going to be like wide open, and maybe a little bit of resonance. And let me just make sure I set this up properly. So the one thing I really would love about Bitwig is if they turn this into a button, so you could actually turn these guys on and off. That would be so useful, you have no idea. But as of right now, they don't have that ability, but maybe in a future release they will. So I could convert this instead of bipolar to a button, and then if I just wanted to turn any of these effects on or off, I could do that. But here we go. Oh, excuse me. Let's route this guy, bring the cutoff down, and bring the resonance up just a little bit. Whoops, I screwed that up. Maybe the trick is I just need to get this around perfectly. Okay, there we go. So now when I go back and play this back, I also have control over a filter here if I want it. And obviously I kind of set some of these to extremes, but So this example is obviously, it's getting worse and worse and worse. It's not really actually making sense to have this in maybe a live set, but the point is very simple, and that's that these macro controls give us a ton of power and flexibility over our effects chains, and really even within our effects. So if we just had one effect here, we also could go out here and set some stuff if we wanted to do that. Really everything is up for grabs in here. Anything that turns blue, you can use to manipulate. And if you have a MIDI controller, I mean, I would recommend wanting the majority of your macros out at the furthest stage. So at the original stage, like for example, this is like the furthest out, the FX chain, and obviously nestled within here is a reverb. So you probably don't want too many macros on things internally, especially if you're working live. It's best to be able to see as much as possible, and you're probably never really going to need too many more than 8, but maybe all the way up to 16. If you had 2 different FX chains running in serial, you could look at that, or if you ran an FX chain into an FX chain for the very reason of having more macro controls, you could do that as well. All right, so I hope that was somewhat helpful for you guys, and you'll hear from me again in the next lesson. Take care.